Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Hack number 75. We are moving our way right along with these shows. Hopefully you find them useful, get a couple of nuggets of information along the way with the different topics that we try to cover. There's so many facets and variables that comes into play when we're talking about retirement planning that we try to share hopefully some good stuff and have a little fun along the way as well. And this week we're going to talk about business owners and maybe some things to consider if you a small business proprietor, something like that. Often they get a little underserved because we just tend to think about things from the, you go to work at the corporate office and you get a 401k this and an IRA that. We're going to go through a few places when it comes to the financial aspect, especially for the retirement aspect of it, some misconceptions, some false assumptions, so on and so forth. So business plan. A lot of times I think small business owners maybe naively go into it and say, hey, if I've got a good business plan and I put this in place and I follow this exactly, that's going to take care of the business and it'll also take care of me as well. And often I think we spend so much more into the business that we totally forget about ourselves.
Right. Yeah. And this is a topic kind of near and dear to my heart as a CPA. And, I've worked with small business owners.
And you are one.
And I am one. Right. So, I know exactly how the process goes. But yeah, it's, business owners are wired differently. They look at the world differently. Obviously, one of their biggest assets is that business.
Right.
And very often they kind of forget about everything else and think that that's what, this is my retirement. And, you talk about a financial plan and what's about the business. Well, yeah, that's an aspect of the financial plan. But unless you're planning on working until the day you drop, what is, you've got to, if you want to actually retire at some point, that business plan has to coordinate with a bigger picture financial plan. So,
yeah. And the idea that we're going to create enough value, that's great. That we're going to get enough value for that, but that's not always the case. So you got to be smart. What was the old adage, Phil, about paying yourself first, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So
paying yourself first, getting the money out of the business. And that's a hard discussion and concept for business owners, because oftentimes they look at it of, well, why would I want to do that? I can take that money and reinvest it and make more of it in the business. And you probably can. Early stages of your business, I would 100% agree. You're trying to get it going and, but once you get it operating and it's, you're kind of in that growth and, steady growth type stage, you have to start switching the focus and make sure that all your investments, so to speak, aren't in one basket. We talk about that all eggs in one basket.
Oh yeah.
General investing concept, diversification. Well, this is applicable here just as well, if not more, because if everything you have is in that business and we go through COVID, the pandemic like this, if you were a restaurant owner, and that's where you put everything you ever had.
And you haven't been paying yourself and then that happened.
Right. You could be in some deep trouble. So you need the business is one aspect of a much bigger plan.
Yeah. And it's, it's not only just pay yourself, it's pay your future self too, right? Because
correct, absolutely.
Especially when you're talking about retirement, that's really paying your future self.
Right.
You're going to need a paycheck when you're older. So yeah, if you're a self-employed business owner and you're, in your 40s or early 50s like myself, you still got to pay yourself because, 65, 70s are coming.
Yep.
So, and often what happens is your Social Security is going to be lower, especially on those years when you first put a business in place and you're not paying yourself or you're not paying yourself as much. Well, you're also not feeding into Social Security as much. So, comparatively, your neighbor is going to probably have a higher Social Security than you are because you haven't been.
If he was an employee or she was an employee, getting paid that more traditional fashion, so to speak.
Right.
And
exactly.
And if you've been working with a CPA that's helping you manage the tax liability and all there's ways to help lower that. And, you don't take as much payroll. There's a lot of ways to manage that tax liability, understanding on the back end what that looks like. Yeah. So that you're paying your future self is a great way to put it because again, back to that business, it's great. There's value there. Absolutely. But like with anything, there's no guarantee, so you still need to have a 401k, put money away just like you would if you were an employee, building a separate asset not tied to that business in the event that, maybe 20 years from today when you're ready, or 10 years,
Right.
that industry isn't as viable or isn't as good as it was, I mean,
Every business and every business model and industry can ebb and flow. And so
right.
actually let's turn our attention to that for a second, Phil. So
Sure.
often I think sometimes when we have a small business or a small business owner, they think that is the retirement plan. I didn't pay myself as much as I wanted to while I was growing it and some of the things we just covered. But when I sell it, that's when I'll be good, right? Well, there's a couple of factors in there that go into play about selling it.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I mean,
Does anybody want it?
well, yeah, is the value still there? And I mean, when you've built a business, did you build a business or did you just buy a job? I mean, there's a lot of business owners
That's
that,
a great point.
I mean, they're the main breadwinner or, rainmaker, or whatever you want to call it in that business. So if you step out, does that business really have value versus creating a business that you might be the manager, the owner that,
Yeah.
it's not directly tied to you. And I mean, if you're a professional, it gets a little challenging.
Sure.
You've got to be able to transition and pass that on to somebody else. And there's ways to do that. But again, it's just one of those considerations of that value of that business and building some kind of a retirement outside of it early. Not to say that the business isn't worth anything. It's absolutely worth something, but it's
to who and how much and
right.
often we view, especially if you're the one who built this thing up, it's kind of like your kid, it's
right.
it's your
Absolutely.
baby, and you might get a little offended or hurt when you find out it's not worth what you think it's worth.
Right.
That happens a lot. I ran into that a number of years ago. I had my own business, a different business at the time, and it had some coffee shops. And before coffee shops really kind of blew up everywhere and Starbucks, basically, ran everybody, into the ground, so to speak, kind of that same philosophy as the Lowe's or the Home Depot to the small
little hardwares and
the hardware stores. And so, I put a lot into it, spent a lot of time, worked a lot of hours, and it was doing pretty well. But when it came time to decide to make the decision to sell it, it just wasn't worth what I thought it was going to be,
Right.
And so that was now I was young enough that it didn't cause me, too many hardships. But if that was your plan for retirement, if that had been my plan for retirement, I'd have been quite disappointed and also a bit more behind the eight ball than I thought I was going to be.
Right. Yeah. And that's, when working with business owners, something we, just like we do with anyone else, kind of look down the road and say, what does that look like? What do you think it's worth at that point? And really have that discussion, and maybe even though you might not be at the point of selling today, have that discussion, go talk to a broker, get a real idea of what the value is of that business, not just what you think it is, because to your point, we're always going to think our business is worth way more than what it is.
$10 million. Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah. But is it really, is this somebody willing to pay that? Because you got to understand, as somebody else coming in, it's an investment to them, so they're putting their assets into that, hoping for a return. And maybe they're not going to be involved and you were. So they've got to, there's all sorts of factors that go into that. So you just have to really understand.
Yeah, because they're going to be where you were, especially if they're buying your business when you kind of started. Yeah, they're buying a more established business than just you launching it from the ground up. But they're still trying to be as cost effective as they can. And they're probably thinking about paying themselves and their future self. So, it's kind of all cyclical and a snowball effect. Anything from a CPA standpoint when it comes to business owners, we're kind of really talking more the philosophy of preparing for retirement. Anything from a numbers angle we should talk about?
Yeah, that's a whole nother animal to get into, but because it's again, you've got to look at the business as an asset totally different than anything else. I mean, a 401k, you're paying taxes as you pull the money out, right? So I mean, a business, if you're going to sell it, cash out, so to speak, take that asset, the cash you receive, and invest it in something else, that transition from a business into a liquid asset cash, your Uncle Sam's there waiting, wanting their piece of it along the way, so you've got to, just like we've had the discussion of taxes and 401ks, and it's not all your money. Well, the same thing here is in the business. I mean, your business might be worth $500,000. That's great. But if all that is profit, then IRS is going to say, well, that's okay, but we want our 25% and the state wants another 5 or whatever it is. So how much of that is going to be left? And
So
is there a way to better structure that?
Right. It's like selling a piece of property, right? So
it's an investment, right? It's no different than selling a stock, basically.
Stock.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I remember one of the first things I learned as well. We had the coffee shops. They levied, tax, and it was for the items. It was for the value of the items inside the business.
Yes. Yeah. The personal property tax. It's like, wait a minute, I paid sales tax when I bought the
when I bought the furniture.
Yeah.
So, and you kind of learn these things as you go sometimes, and that's half the challenge. It's also half the fun, and also half the it's more than two halves, I suppose. But there's also the heartache and the frustration and the pull your hair outness sometimes of being a small business owner.
Right.
Because there's a lot of little things that can chip away at it, and I guess maybe that kind of brings it back to full circle. Just saying that's really why you got to carve out, if you're a small business owner, you got to carve out a way to pay yourself something along the way. Because if not, you are going to really be in dire straits at the end of whatever that road looks like, whether the family keeps it, whether you sell it, whether whatever, right? If you've not been paying yourself, you could be in a real pickle.
Start with an IRA. I mean, that isn't it's not technically a business retirement plan. I mean, it's based on the income you generate.
Right.
But you can put away up to 6,000 or 7,000, depending on age, into an IRA each year.
Sure.
So if that's all you can do, then that's a great place to start. If you're wanting to put away a little more, probably the next step up is going to be like a simple IRA. So the thresholds are a little higher that they can put in there. That's going to be a company plan. Once you get into those, though, now you have to start offering it to employees. So that's where some additional costs come in, and you have to understand what that looks like. So
you just got to work with an advisor, find out some of those.
Yeah, there's a lot of intricacies in there, but it really, where it comes down to is how much you want to put away. I mean, all the way up to the higher level plan, 401k with a profit sharing, you can put away 50 to 60,000 a year per owner.
Oh wow.
Still having to put away money for the employees, or there's ones even beyond that. If you want to get into what they call money purchase pensions, where now we're basically funding a pension, a self-funded pension through the company, which now you can put away hundreds of thousands potentially.
So different tiers for different levels of business and success and business owners.
Right. It really comes down to how much do I want to, or can I afford to put away, and what kind of a plan then fits. In fact, I just had a discussion with a business owner yesterday about that. Okay, where do you want to, what does your business look like, and what do you, what's your budget? What do you want to put away? So,
I guess in some aspects, as this really small business, kind of treated almost like some of the other things that you would typically do. Whatever you're, buying supplies, buying stock or whatever, not stocks, but like stock for your store, so to speak.
Right.
So if you're buying X coffee, if you're buying X, percentage of your monthly income is going towards, rejuvenating that coffee supply. Well, maybe put a percentage into your paying yourself, or even into your own retirement.
Yep. Build it into your budget right up front. Like I said, even start small, whatever that amount is that you can afford, build it into the budget, start a little bit here and there, and then just grow it over time. As the business grows, make sure that piece of it grows too. So
there you go. Pay yourself, pay your future self, folks. So that's our conversation around business owners. If you're a business owner, you need some help, you're trying to figure out some ways to go about doing that, or you're struggling with creating a good budget that works for you, or just how to put money away for retirement. Again, selling it's a great idea, but you got to think of those things through, because, what's it worth? Who's willing to buy it? There's just a lot of variables. Is it even viable? So many different things can change. You could have a business for 20 years. I mean, maybe you were a printer store, you did printing, and 20 years later, everybody's just printing at home, or whatever the case is. So there's just things change,
changes happen. So
So if you've got questions, you need help, you know what to do. Reach out to Phil. It's on the screen. If you're watching, 248-888-7530. If you're not, there's the number, 248-888-7530. Get yourself on the calendar, have a conversation. There's no cost or obligation to do so. So reach out to him and let him know that you just want to chat. You can do a virtual meeting, or whatever the case might be, phone call, whatever the case is. So just get started. Do yourself and your retirement a favor, 248-888-7530, or go to philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com. Don't forget to subscribe on the various podcasting platforms as well. And Phil and I will talk to you next week. Thank you, my friend. Have yourself a good week, okay?
Thanks, you too.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.